This morning's lesson is entitled, Engaged Where We Are. And we might think back there is where we were, and over there might be where we would like to be. But here is where we are presently. In light of that, what marks our present activity? Are we sitting just remembering the past? Are we waiting for the future? Or are we doing what we can where we are right now? Right now, because of a pandemic, we might be thinking of how things were. We might also be looking forward to when this thing is over. However, as we find ourselves presently doing things differently, are we remaining focused on still doing? As we consider the here and now, there are life realities that we recognize, but yet there are the realities of God that we also need to be mindful of. As we think about our life realities, it has been said, do what you can with what you have where you are. Theodore Roosevelt. As I read this quote not long ago, there were three things that immediately came to mind. Number one, I can only do what I can do. There are limitations to my abilities. I can't do all things. Secondly, I only have what I have. I have limited resources. I can only put to use that which I possess. And thirdly, where I am is where I be presently, in spite of perhaps desiring to be somewhere else. I can't be two places at once. Presently, I am limited by time and space. Also, I cannot live in the past or in the future that has not yet come. We are to live mindful of what the present presents. My responsibility is to consider how I engage in the here and now. Am I recognizing the opportunities that God provides and that life provides to do the things of God? Not only the things for me, but also to serve in a good way, to even serve God's divine purposes. As Paul wrote to the church in Galatians 6:6-10, he wrote, let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. We are to be sowing something. What kind of seeds are we sowing? What are we sowing right now in spite of the circumstances and situations of life? This may be sowing time with harvest time coming later. And so Paul urged the Galatians not to give up. And we need to not give up because we will reap later according to what it is that we have sown right now. Are we sowing seeds of discouragement or encouragement? Are we sowing seeds of discontent or thankfulness for what we can do? Are we sowing seeds of divisiveness or are we working to draw together? We are to be mindful of, even presently, the opportunities to do good. To do so to everyone, and especially to those who are with us in a right relationship with Christ. As we have opportunities just arise. Opportunities aren't always something that we can mark on the calendar, and they are something for us to be mindful of. They are something for us to recognize as they arise. And this is in spite of things not entirely as we might like them to be. I love the encouragement that we have from Proverbs 19:21, as we still need to remember that God has plans. And there we read, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." God is fully able to bring out the things that He wants to bring to pass, the works that He wants to have done. He has a plan, and His plan cannot be thwarted. He has a timeline, and things will take place in accordance with His timeline. I believe in the providence of God and His ability to fulfill and bring to fruition His plans. But I also understand life in this realm, or in connection with life in this realm, stuff happens. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 11, as Solomon is addressing life as it takes place in this world under the sun, he says, "Again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all." Generally speaking, stuff just happens in this life. And as we consider our day-to-day lives, there are things in life which are mere coincidence. There are also things in life which God has directly orchestrated. And now we may have difficulty sometimes pinpointing clearly that which was the direct hand of God and that which was a coincidence, but still in any of those places we need to be mindful of glorifying God and striving to serve His divine purposes. As we go about life, it is good to give due consideration to all of that in which we engage and how we engage in those things. We need to continue looking for purpose in the present. Consider the time of Esther. And the story of Esther is an interesting one where we see that even as God's people were in exile, how God was still working out His plans and how God puts people in places to work out His purposes, even when they're not aware that that is what is taking place. But in Esther chapter 3, verses 12 to 15, we note the crisis that was there as Haman was upset with Mordecai. It didn't matter that all other people were bowing to him and showing him honor and respect, but because this one Jew, Mordecai, would not honor him like other people were, he just could not get over that. He allowed that to remain in the forefront of his focus. And in order to take care of Mordecai, he decided to put forth a plan and got the king's permission to put forth a plan to annihilate the Jews. And so in verses 12 to 13 or 15, we read, "Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. And the couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Susa was thrown into confusion." Would we not admit that we are presently living in confusing times? We're given contradicting information regarding the pandemic and how to deal with it, how to safeguard ourselves. We're not hearing a one voice together in what needs to be done. There's politics at play. There's opinions at play, and we're finding ourselves having to sort through it all ourselves as best we can and be as precautious as we can. And so here was the crisis at that time. And verses 4 through 12 of the 4th chapter, we find we find Mordecai, who is mourning in sackcloth and ashes, and being in sackcloth and ashes, he's not able to go through the king's gate. But Esther hears about it, and she sends to find out what is going on, and even offers him clothes. And so in verses 4 through 12, this is what we read. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called to Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. And Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. And Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. Mordecai sends back to Esther with a focus for the present and with those memorable words that we often think about associated with Esther, where we read in verses 13 to 14, then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Who knows? Who knows? Well, maybe only God. And even in our present situation, we wonder about many things, but God knows what is going on, and we need to keep our focus and our trust in Him as we continue to do what we can. But as Mordecai also told Esther, who knows, but maybe this is why you are in your position in the kingdom for such a time as this. And as at the time of Esther, the relief and the deliverance could come from somewhere else. And so here is a truth. God can fulfill all His purposes without me. God can fulfill all His purposes without me. That's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? We do need to guard against thinking too much of ourselves as if it all does depend upon us. However, let us not think too less of ourselves either, and understanding that there are great ways in which God can use us and desires to use us. Noble works that He desires for us to be engaged in. Heavenly things, matters that He wants us to be engaged in. And God can Though God can fulfill all his purposes without me, he has this desire to fulfill noble purposes through me and through you. He desires to use us. And so we may think perhaps it's my time or your time that we are to be engaged here. Not isolate ourselves and do nothing, though interaction may be somewhat limited at this time. Are we utilizing the means that are possible for us? To be the encourager and not the discourager. To show how we can still go on with the flow, as uncomfortable and as limited as it might be, rather than fussing and fuming and complaining and making it harder. And to reveal our firm trust in God while still relating to others in a respectful and a kindly manner. But here's another truth from God that we need to keep in mind, and that is that God does desire for his work to be done in and through me and also through you. God's desire in connection with our life goes back to his plan from the beginning. In Ephesians 2 and verse 10, this is according to God's creative design, where we read, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." God has works for us to engage in. God has works for us to walk in. We were created. We were made for God's purposes and to carry out his purposes. There is fruit to be produced. Right into the church at Colossae, in Colossians 1, 9 through 12, here Paul wrote, "And so from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for all endurance and patience with joy, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light." We are to be bearing fruit in every good work. It's what we were created for. It's what we were designed for. It is part of God's divine plan. Yeah, God can fulfill his purposes any way he wants and through anyone he wants. But God does desire to work in our life and through our life to fulfill his will to his glory and honor. Let us live life's moments as God moments. Though we might sometimes refer to particular situations or moments in life as God moments, referring to them as unexplainable situations that came together in a good and God-glorifying way that seemed to reflect God had to have been the one to work it all out. Let us also walk with God in a manner in which we become God-glorifying participants in our moments in life. Our moment to glorify him, our moment to shine and be used as he desires to use us. By living in such a manner, we can find again and again what we can do with what we have, where we are, is sufficient for fulfilling purposes to the glory of God. May we seek God's help and having our eyes open to the opportunities as we surrender to his will and to be used by him in our life. And Paul, writing to the church at Philippi, in Philippians 2, 12 to 15, he says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Our moment to shine, our moments to shine. It is God who works in us to will and to work for His good pleasure. Are we allowing God to do that? Let us remain mindful of being God's servants in this time and place, being His servants where we are. As servants of God, may we remain open to being used by God even during such a time as this.